You're listening to Breaking New Ground. In this podcast, we provide thought-provoking conversations for those looking to begin or advance their entrepreneurial real estate goals.
Together, we'll venture into the world of commercial real estate with entrepreneurs who challenge the status quo, building innovative paths with bold approaches.
We're your hosts. I'm John Pugh, a real estate developer and investor.
And I'm Rachel Walters, a real estate marketing expert. Throughout our episodes, we'll bring in real estate trailblazers, creating a space for inspiring conversations surrounding commercial real estate.
Pugh Management is proud to sponsor the podcast Breaking New Ground. Pugh Management is a premier developer for mixed-use, multifamily, and industrial properties. We love to develop places to live, work, and play. Pugh Management partners with family offices and institutional investors on projects in New England and Central Florida. Check us out online at pughmgmt.com.
In today's episode, Brad Hargraves is joining us. He is the founder and editor of Thesis Driven, a publication covering innovation in the built world. Over the past decade, he has co-founded General Assembly, a pioneer in education and career transformation, specializing in today's most on-demand skills, as well as Common, a multifamily operating company focused on innovative housing typologies like co-living.
In this discussion, we will focus on the most interesting trends today, including autonomous vehicles, niche real estate strategies, and automation in real estate development. Welcome to the pod, Brad.
Thank you so much for having me on. Excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Absolutely. So just to kind of kick things off, we'd love to hear you've had a really interesting journey, kind of as we just mentioned in the bio, your bio, and we'd love to hear what was it that inspired you to start Thesis Driven and kind of how that's evolved into what it is today.
Yeah, thanks. So I started writing Thesis Driven about 2 years ago, really because I saw a gap in kind of how real estate was being covered. That is, you had a lot of people, journalists, traditional trade publications writing about deals, kind of who bought what and for how much. And then you had a lot of kind of academic work, which was really interesting, focused on kind of new things, the future, but tough for practitioners in the real estate to translate that into their day-to-day. So started Thesis Driven, initially just doing, a few of these a month, deep dives into very specific topics that inform and are fueling the future of the built world. So, our first ever one was, 3,000 words into office to residential conversions. Like this was back in mid 2022. Like, wow. Did these make any sense? When do they make sense? Who's actually doing them? So actually going and talking to practitioners that have done office to resi conversions, even pre-pandemic. And that really resonated. And people said, wow, this is, actually giving me a unique insight into something. So since we've over the past 2 years, we've grown Thesis Driven. We now do, 2 of these a week. Kind of really digging deep into topics really that are instrumental to the future of the built world and what we're going to see not just in 18 months, but in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And, just as part of building that, sometimes we do fun servicey things too. We have a lot of people, developers, real estate tech entrepreneurs, investors. A lot of LPs follow us and read Thesis Driven. So like today, we just published a guide to all real estate events in 2025. We polled our audience. What are you going to? What did you like? What did you not like? Got some really spicy reviews of some things, and just kind of put all that out in a big guidebook. So, we're not just kind of these wonky deep dives anymore, but we still love the 3,500 words into some weird real estate investing thesis, and that's still a big part of what we do.
Yeah, and is that personality driven? Is that kind of you, Brad? Do you really like kind of focus and go real deep on a subject? Is that kind of what drew you to that format? Or
yeah, I mean, part of this is just I'm a big believer that someone's writing is inspired and influenced by who they are and kind of what they enjoy, and there's no way I would be able to do this if I didn't enjoy writing kind of these wonky deep dives, and I think. You look at another incredible writer who is kind of pushing real estate journalism forward, Hiten Samtani. Look at what he's doing with The Promote. Super successful, awesome writer, covering great things, totally different than Thesis Driven. He's out there covering personalities, drama, like what's going on, like the scuttlebutt, like crazy international transactions. And like, I love it. I love reading it. It's fascinating. I could never write that. That's not who I am. So of course it has to do with the person and, who the person is and what they're, what that gets that writer excited and going.
It seems like somewhat maybe I've been reading for a couple years now, but it seems like there's almost a little bit more opinion baked into some of your pieces lately. Is that a good read, or is that not necessarily the right way to read kind of the evolution?
Well, I would say that there's always been some opinion baked into varying degrees. I mean, just like what we choose to cover reflects our opinion and our editorial view. Absolutely. So it's less like, is it more opinion, less opinion, and more, how on the surface is the opinion. And, we try to not have as much opinion about kind of big things people are arguing about and focus more on, wonky parts of the zoning code, local issues, things that, could influence and improve the built world. So I think our most read post of all time was a collaboration that we did with Stephen Smith at the Center for Building in North America, where we wrote about single stair reform. And
really?
Kind of before a lot of people were talking about single stair reform, we really focused on, let's go into and understand kind of why the U.S. is kind of unique here in terms of requiring, two egress points at, even relatively small buildings. That makes a lot of small multifamily ground up, a lot of missing middle, not feasible. So we really did a deep dive there, and that, that was absolutely an op-ed, but it wasn't a topic that people were super focused on. So we do try, there is an opinion there, but a lot of it is us trying to surface things, not weighing in on the side of some major debate, but, surfacing something that may not be salient quite yet.
Interesting. And then you mentioned the review of the 2025 events and everything. I think that's kind of an interesting thing that I don't think you've done before, right? You just said it was kind of a new thing. Is that so? Because I have a very specific kind of viewpoint, and I think obviously everybody does, but viewpoint about kind of what Thesis Driven is, and is kind of these focused deep dives that you were saying, and now you're kind of reviewing events. Is that take on a whole new kind of life for you, and does it kind of change the way you interact with the industry or the community a little bit, or kind of how does that, what does that look like, I guess, in terms of what your evolution is here?
It's a good question. I think we look at everything and say, kind of, do we, is this going to be useful to our community, and kind of, do we have a right to play here from kind of a brand and a reputational perspective? Mm-hmm. And this not only, I would say, checked both those boxes, but almost felt like a bit of a moral imperative. And that those are strong words for like reviewing real estate events, but like people drop a lot of money on these. You look at some of these prices and,
Absolutely.
It's, thousands and thousands of dollars for tickets to some of these events. You add in flights and hotels, and, sending two people to a real estate trade show easy is, $10,000. So, there's no place out there. There's very little transparency over, not just what's good, what's not good, but, who, like, what is right for what type of person. Sure. You see a lot of people going to one show and they're like, it was all tiny early stage startups, or like, it was all dominated by one real estate sector. And so just shining a little bit of light on that, I think, is squarely within our mandate. And, we have a few of these kind of recurring things we do. The first ever recurring one we launched was actually, we do an annual temperature check on all new cities under development around the world. It's a minor obsession of mine, is people building new cities. And so, and it's the saddest post we do, because it's all just like crypto smoke and mirrors on one hand. It's like autocrats like building, coup-proof capitals, or like monuments to their own egos on the other hand. So it's a really sad, like depressing post, but we at least check in on it and say, like, is anyone doing anything interesting here? And then we write a few others. We listen to all the REITs earnings calls and what are they saying about technology and innovation. That's a popular one. So we have a few kind of these recurring letters that we do, and hopefully this will be a new one.
Interesting. Yeah, Rachel, you and I were talking the other day about just the sheer number of real estate industry events, and it was kind of it's gonna be overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, Brad, you minimize it, but it is, it is really true. You're spending a lot of money, and these tech companies also who do not know the industry are, they're being sold in a booth, and maybe that is, like you said, even just the basic is that you're at the asset class you're going after, and what is the audience, and you know what? Also, you might need to do this recurring, because I've been going to pretty much similar events, both on the traditional commercial real estate side and the prop tech side since 2019. And they are changing now yearly, like the audience, how big they are they growing? Are they shrinking? Has it, also on the real estate side, who has the money and the time to send people, right? Right. Our office people there, our industrial people there, who can spend the money and the time to go to these events. And so I think it is very meaningful because people are spending a lot of money and the events are changing. And if I could just also go make a little segue, now that maybe not just now, but now that there are classes, if you could talk about how that started, if somebody asked you, where did that idea come from?
Yeah, so it's thanks for bringing that up. That earlier this year we started teaching courses as part of Thesis Driven, and we started just doing it entirely in person in New York, and we've since added a couple online as well. And we started with kind of one initial topic, which we call fundamentals of commercial real estate, and it was really targeting prop tech founders and entrepreneurs, people who are new to the real estate industry. So, a prop tech company hires someone out of e-commerce, or, the founder is coming out of a different industry and they're building for real estate. But, so many of these tech companies, the founders, the employees, they don't understand what a GPLP structure is. They couldn't describe a waterfall. They don't understand how debt works. They don't understand how real estate developers make money. They couldn't tell you what a promote is. So this is it's really the fundamentals of 2 days. We're going to go through everything case driven. So we actually make up a developer, Elevated Properties. Michelle is the GP. She's doing an adaptive reuse project of a 200,000 square foot vacant office building. And so you learn about kind of how the developer, how people in real estate, the lenders, the LPs, how they go about their time. So what does a day in the life look like for people at the property level, for people at the corporate level? And so students have found it really useful as kind of get from 0 to 1 or 2 in terms of your understanding of the real estate industry. We've also, which we did not expect, seen a lot of people coming from traditional real estate companies that that want to hire talent from outside the real estate industry. So, big real estate developers bringing in their technology teams, their venture teams. So that one's been a real win. We've launched. We now have 4 different programs. Fundamentals commercial real estate. We have another one which is focused on capital raising, specifically on the real estate side. A third is kind of intro to development. So looking at kind of primarily targeting real estate agents, architects, contractors, people who want to do their first local development project. And then the fourth, which we just announced, is called Selling into Real Estate Owners. And it is more of a sales-oriented course for people at primarily vendors and prop tech companies selling into the real estate industry. So kind of all runs the gamut, but it's been a big part of our growth in 2024, and we're really excited about where that's going next year too.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's a real public service, quite frankly. I think Rachel and I have talked about that in the past, that there's there's kind of been this gap in the market in terms of really good online and in-person content for people. Just very much, we've had conversations about prop tech and how so many of those founders maybe have trouble getting into the space or really developing that product the way in which they should, because they don't necessarily know. They know the tech, maybe they don't know the real estate. So that's a great service, and I'm sure there's a lot of people getting a lot out of it, which is really cool.
Thanks.
So shifting gears, would love to talk a little bit more about some of the trends you're seeing, some of the things you're seeing in real estate today, and want to just kind of open that up. We had talked a little bit about niche real estate strategies. I know you guys have done a ton of deep dives on those. Is part of covering some of these niches because you're seeing or you're hearing that there's a lot more value to be had in some of the niches now that the market's been a little challenging in the last few years? Or what was the impetus for that, and where's that headed?
Yeah, I mean, it really came from conversations directly with real estate investors, LPs, of, you can't just do straight down the fairway Sunbelt multifamily value add anymore. Like that just doesn't work. So, there has to be some niche play to it. And there's a lot of, and I take, niche very broadly. You don't have to be doing RV parks or marinas to be in a niche. It could be going into, really like marginal tertiary markets. It could be taking a different operational approach to things. It could be, doing something, some new asset class like a marina or an RV park. So there's a lot of ways to think about niches. I take kind of a broad approach there, but what gets people excited is finding, some developer, some GP that's been generating, 25 plus IRRs doing cell tower leases or, industrial outdoor storage or some category that 18 months ago, nobody had ever heard of. So that's kind of, we look at that as sort of part of our job at Thesis Driven is we're not necessarily going to teach you about how to do a cell tower lease business to the extent that we will, you'll be able to go out and do it. But, if it comes up at a cocktail party, you'll at least know what it is.
And so of those, I'm very curious about the kind of the popularity. Are there any that kind of stand out in terms of popularity that you've published for the last, 24 months? Because I've read most of them, but I'm kind of curious about that.
I mean, it's tough for me to like we're not doing any quantitative assessment of popularity. I mean, every time I write about niches, there's some guy that sends me an email and a LinkedIn message screaming about truck parking and why I haven't written about truck parking yet. So I don't know how to weigh that. But there are some people really passionate about truck parking. Yeah. I would say kind of on that note, industrial outdoor storage is one that gets a lot of attention right now. I think that kind of rounds down to truck parking. But there's a lot of people looking at very capital light niches right now that, they can go do without a lot of debt. Strategies like land development. I think, some of the land developers I've spoken with, I mean, they're still doing great because that model, that niche, is kind of independent of interest rates. Because you're not putting debt on this land, you're holding it for 6 to 18 months typically to entitle it, add some improvements, and then you're selling it to end users. So, it's that's very operationally intensive. I mean, these people have back offices of people sending mailers.
Yeah.
But generally the strategies that have done the best are the ones that are least susceptible to interest rate pressure. And I think that's going to continue now that, there's no immediate promise of rates coming down in 2025.
Wow. I would have to agree with that. It's just been such an interesting time the last few months, right? Just kind of seeing how the election played out and the expectations for inflation and kind of how that's really evolved. And I think there's clearly a lot of concern that inflation's stickier than people were giving it credit for 3-4 months ago. And I think that's it's an important observation for sure, just in the market today. So I think I'd love to hear what autonomous vehicles is a category that you kind of mentioned as something of interest that you've spent some time thinking about lately. I know something I'm passionate about and interested in. I'm really curious to kind of hear, are you, and maybe I missed it, have you guys written an article already on autonomous vehicles, the impact on real estate, or is this something maybe you're developing for future?
Yeah, so we wrote one probably a year ago, kind of declaring that, hey, autonomous vehicles are here and they're real this time.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have been even more right than we knew, based on the last year and the arc of their expansion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on another right now, which is specifically focused on applications of autonomous vehicles in the hospitality industry. Which really excited for that one.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, I look at AVs as like probably the most, even though there are people talking about it, it's probably the most under discussed topic in real estate right now, because I think the impact is really tremendous.
Absolutely.
And I feel that there are a lot of people both kind of on the media side, as well as, big players in the industry who say, hey, there was a hype cycle in the past, 2016, 2017, everyone was talking about autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
They weren't ready yet. They weren't ready for prime time.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people feel burned by that hype cycle. You had Musk, you had Travis Kalanick out there hyping him up, saying, I mean, if you listen to what they're saying, you would have believed that, autonomous vehicles are coming in 2 years.
Exactly.
Well, there's a lot of reasons, and we get, in the article into some of the technical reasons why auto manufacturers chose to kind of skip level 3 autonomy, go straight from so the Society of Automotive Engineers has like 5 tiers of autonomy. Most cars on the road today are some version of level 2. So you have cruise control, you have automatic lane centering. I mean, that's a level 2 autonomous vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
But, the human is required to stay alert and at the wheel at all times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Level 3 is like, well, the car can pretty much do anything and the human can disengage. But in certain rare situations, the human has to take the wheel and has to take over.
Yeah.
Generally, car companies, I think correctly, and regulators kind of came to the agreement that level 3 is just dangerous. It's a bad idea. Like, you have someone reading a book, sleeping, watching a movie, playing a video game, and like, all of a sudden the car's like, take the wheel.
Yeah.
No, that's never going to work.
Not a good idea. Absolutely.
Not a good idea. And so everyone just kind of came together and said, we're just going to skip level 3. And we're going to go straight to level 4, which is geo and condition boxed full autonomy. Meaning no driver, doesn't need a steering wheel, like doesn't even need the ability for anyone to drive, but it can only drive on certain roads and in certain conditions. Now, that's obviously a really wide aperture.
Sure.
So that could mean basically perfect conditions, test course like roads. That's kind of useless. That's sort of where we were 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could mean pretty much any road and any condition that a human would be safe driving. That's all level 4 autonomy.
I see.
So where I think it unlocks is what I call kind of level 4.9. Level 5, by the way, is perfect autonomy. It's, fully autonomous, any condition. It can drive you to a mountain house in the snow. It can like go anywhere at any time.
Yeah.
We're a long way from level 5. But we're not that far from like level 4.9. That's what I call it, which is it could solve for the vast majority of driving situations in the vast majority of conditions. It can take you, in a given metro area from home to work to school to the grocery store, downtown, out to the exurbs, in a wide variety of conditions that a human would feel comfortable driving. We're pretty much there in a lot of metro areas. And Waymo has been very, very conservative with how they've rolled out. And the safety stats are pretty extraordinary. I mean, it's cutting accidents by, 50%, 2/3. And the accidents that are happening are almost all human caused. Humans running into the Waymos. So people are going to increasingly start noticing this and saying like, hey, maybe our regulatory regime where we're putting the brakes on this technology is actually costing a lot of lives, because 45,000 Americans a year die in car crashes. Yeah. And Trump just came out and said one of the top priorities for him on the transportation side is deregulating autonomous vehicles. Wow. So like this is coming. And it's coming a lot faster than I think most people in the real estate industry believe.
Wow. That's exciting. That's super exciting. So one of the things that I know from my time, I mentioned before we got on the call, I spent some time studying autonomous vehicles and kind of their impact on urban form is parking, right? The parking requirements, the need for parking. If there's the ability to have shared autonomous cars, you can just summon a car and it shows up and drives you wherever you want. There's implications for driveways, massive parking lots, et cetera. Things, the whole ground plane in the city really kind of frees itself up to be used for, let's say, better things, right? Whether it be green space or parks or recreational space, et cetera. Is that something that, I mean, to me, that's one of the biggest pieces. And obviously there's some impact on the demand for automobile infrastructure because there's less cars on the road. I don't know. But I was reading about this yesterday. There was a kind of a note saying that there would be demand for less public transit, which I know as an urbanist, a fellow urbanist, I've always been extremely supportive of the idea of developing public transit, and we certainly still need a lot of it in our country. But just thinking, that does make sense, right? If you can just call up a car anytime and it's going to take you somewhere, it just totally transforms our city. What do you see as some of the more important impacts on cities and urban form?
Yeah, so I think the two really obvious ones are parking and gas stations. Namely, we need a lot less of both. Yeah. And, I don't really see a way around that. What you do need more of are industrial spaces, charging stations adjacent to major demand hubs. So downtowns, dense suburban areas with really good utility hookups. So, and I'll put a pin in this question of the utility hookups because we're in parallel facing a real challenge around utility generation and power capacity in the United States. That's, because AI and data centers converging with electric and autonomous vehicles, that's going to create a bit of a perfect storm in 2 or 3 years around like our capacity to generate power. So Absolutely. Putting a pin in that, definitely less demand for parking, way more demand for loading and unloading zones. You are going to see a big fight in a lot of cities around how curb space is utilized. Right now, a lot of curb space, even in a place like New York City, where I am, is just taken up by long-term car storage. I think it's absolutely crazy that the city of New York lets people park on the street, store their cars for free in the middle of Manhattan. It's insane, but they do. And we're going to see a big fight between people who are using these autonomous vehicles being dropped off, getting picked up, loading, unloading, deliveries, which are ramping up as well, and the legacy entitlement that a lot of urban residents feel to park their cars on the street. So that fight is coming in a big way. I agree with you, concern about public transit. I think it wipes out the public transit use case in 90% of cities in the U.S. Because, most cities in the U.S. are not New York, they're not Boston, they're not D.C. They don't really have enough density to support a truly robust public transit system. Public transit is effectively a transportation of last resort for people who cannot drive or cannot afford a car for whatever reason. Yep. You have ubiquitous, inexpensive driverless vehicles. It's going to be way more cost effective for those cities to just give vouchers to people who can't afford a car than it is to, staff a system of bus rapid transit, light rail, things like that. So, I'm looking at a place like Charlotte, North Carolina, making big investments in light rail right now, where the built form is just like not really designed for that. And I'm like, as much as I am an urbanist and a big fan of trains and public transit and all that, I'm like, that I don't know if that makes sense right now. Yeah. I don't see how New York and DC and Boston and places like that, just given the density, get away from public transit. Like there's just a physics problem if you can't fit that many cars on the road.
Well, and so all of the things you just said kind of paint a picture, and it's a question that I've thought about as well. It's just this: do most of our cities become these multi-nodal, multipolar cities, distributed high density cores, as opposed to one traditional downtown, which is kind of the hub and spoke, as opposed to a multipolar? Do you kind of see that happening, or because it seems like it's kind of already happening in some places? Like Charlotte would be a great example. That seems like that would be a natural fit for that sort of thing. The triangle area in research area in North Carolina.
Yeah, I do. I think it will happen, but in maybe a different way than it has happened in the past. So like that sort of happened in the 1980s, where
that's true.
Corporate headquarters sprawled out in a big way. They went out to the suburbs. You had these giant suburban office parks, things like that. And I think a lot of people here kind of like disaggregation, and they think that that is what will happen again. Another letter we're working on coming out in December called In Search of the Walkable Exurban Downtown. And it really paints this contrast between kind of two things people want. People want more space.
Yeah.
They like autonomous vehicles. There's a lot of trends that are pushing people away from the city, but they still want walkability. There's still this like fundamental desire when you ask people, walk down the street, grab a cup of coffee. Like there is a vibrant downtown not too far away. And that feels like a contrast. And where that has been bridged are these exurban downtowns, where they're 30 to 60 miles away from the traditional downtown. They have this like nice quaint walkable core, but they have a lot of space around them. They have a lot of affordability. And if you look at where you've seen the greatest growth population wise for the past 5 years, it's all these walkable exurban downtowns. And
existing downtowns, we're talking
existing downtowns. Now there's kind of another question of like, well, can you build a new one? Which nobody has really managed to do yet. But what people have done is found these little towns, like, some of them already like pretty wealthy places. Look at like Westchester, Pennsylvania is a great example outside Philadelphia. It's already like a wealthy exurb, but has seen, tremendous growth that has greatly outpaced the Philadelphia metro over the past 5 years. You go to somewhere like Atlanta, a place like Gainesville, about 40 miles to the northeast of Atlanta. Crazy growth versus the Atlanta metro area. McKinney, Texas, got a really nice core walkable downtown. Outpaced DFW growth. So you look again and again and you see these examples, and then you can kind of draw the counterfactual and they're like, well, are there walkable exurban downtowns that haven't seen that growth yet, but have a lot of the bones? Well, is that the beginning of an investment thesis?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's super interesting. And then to one of the points you made a second ago, I think, people have tried to build these centers, these kind of urban centers and hubs, and maybe consciously and unconsciously, maybe with malls and things like that. But so much of it's focused on retail and not necessarily public space. And there's typically a lack of, public uses, government uses, any civic or religious, spiritual. There's a lot of that, or the cultural element is always an important of a downtown. I feel like, and maybe it's public-private partnerships that are needed to create some of those, but it seems like typically there's just so much focus on shopping, which of course is an important part of making great places. But I think there's a bit of a missing element a lot of times, because going to a mall is a certain thing. You're not downtown; it's a mall, right? So
totally.
But I wonder if that's something that people try to solve a little bit more intently. I know here in Tampa, there's a development. It's pretty successful. It's called Midtown, and it's not in the exurbs, but it's high density development. It's got some multifamily, some office, retail around a central courtyard kind of space, and it's turned out well. But I just wonder, kind of, is that something people can do more of in those exurbs? But that's really great to hear that there's more of those that are really developed that way, because I don't think I was aware of some of those examples you just gave. So.
it's in general, developers have found it's much easier to take an existing core and invest in that core than it is to build from scratch. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The main one is really zoning code. These existing, 19th century built urban cores have a built form that would be deeply illegal to build today. You can't, you even go to these kind of like semi-depressed places 3 hours away, 2 hours away from a major city, and you look at their zoning code and it's absolute garbage. It's all the same anti-development crap you see in the suburbs and in major coastal cities, and so that's a shame. But you have setbacks, like you have to have, you build something from scratch, you have to have really wide streets, like
suburban
a
setbacks,
ton of parking required. So you look at a failure case, and I point to a couple of failure cases in this letter. I look at, Reston Town Center, Virginia. No, I think it's like overly aggressive to say Reston Town Center is like failed. But
by the way, I grew up in Herndon, Virginia, right next door to Reston, and that was the first urban place that I remember ever being built and going to as a 13-year-old. Yeah. But it was 4 blocks in the middle of a cornfield, and it was. Yep. Anyways, but tell your story. I'm curious to hear what
I'm curious your take too, as as someone who grew up there, but clearly they tried to build the walkable Exurban downtown, and they sort of did, but they didn't fully break car supremacy. So it's still kind of a car sewer. And you look at the value proposition, you go to even the Reston Town Center website, and they're talking up how many parking spots they have.
Oh, there's a lot. Yeah. So I said cornfield. It was just surrounded by parking lots when I was a kid. Now it's
not cornfields; they're parking lots.
There's still too much parking. Yeah.
And so you don't, that if you don't fully separate at least a little core from the car, I think and designing for the car and all of the regulations that come from designing car-centric places, I think it's really hard to make the feel work.
Yeah, because older downtowns were designed for pedestrians, right, and horses and carriages and smaller vehicles. Yep, slower.
Right, and the storefronts abut the street, and they're it feels inviting and it feels warm and it feels like there's density. Whereas you have a building that's 30 feet off and a street that's 30 feet wide, curb to curb, it's going to be tough.
It's not friendly for pedestrians, absolutely. So I'm curious, you mentioned hospitality and autonomous vehicles. Maybe just give us a little flavor of kind of what that, what kind of a big picture idea is there, because I've never thought about that. I'm kind of curious what that is.
Well, I have to tell a story from Vietnam. Can I tell the story from Vietnam?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
So my wife and I were traveling in Vietnam in 2014, and we really wanted to stay at this really incredible mountain resort in Sapa up in the hills. But it's very hard to get to. There's no airport nearby, and it's a 5-hour drive from Hanoi. Wow. But it's a really nice resort. And the way they solve this is they took over several cars of the overnight government train, because nothing says luxury travel like an overnight government train. But they took over several cars. They completely redid them, turned them into these beautiful luxury hotel rooms where, you go in and your hospitality experience actually begins at the Hanoi train station. You show up at night, you are greeted with a hot towel and a bottle of, and a glass of champagne, and they walk you to your room on the train, and you have dinner and go to bed, and it's cool. It's a really fun experience. And you wake up the next morning and you're a 30-minute drive from the hotel. And they take you there. So think about this from an autonomous vehicle standpoint, extending the hospitality experience, not from the door of the resort, but all the way to the front door of the guest's house or apartment. So an autonomous vehicle, remember, where we're going with autonomy, you no longer need a steering wheel. You no longer need a dashboard. You can completely redesign the interior of the car. And the autonomous vehicle pulls up, it opens, you've got a bottle of wine, you've got dinner, you've got a bed in there.
Yeah.
You get in, you have dinner, it drives slowly 40 miles an hour in the right-hand lane. 8 hours later, if you're coming from New York, you could wake up in the Adirondacks, the coast of northern Maine, the Finger Lakes, Shenandoah Valley, the Outer Banks of North Carolina.
Huh.
It really opens the aperture, and it avoids that, the worst part of the weekend trip is 3 hours in traffic, getting out east, getting to the Hudson Valley, wherever you're going. It totally avoids that.
Cool.
And you do the same thing on Sunday night. So I think it really changes a lot about the weekend trip and kind of what's possible from a hospitality standpoint. So I'm very excited. I think it's not the first or even the second application you're going to see widely of autonomy, but it's the one I'm most excited about.
Cool. Very interesting. That makes a ton of sense too. Yeah, your point about that being the most stressful piece, and you're on vacation, but Clark Griswold, you're driving to the theme park, right? It's you drive yourself and your family crazy, right?
Totally.
That's wild. All right. Well, I think we wanted to cover one more. We wanted to talk a little bit more about automation, kind of in real estate development. What are some things in real estate development you're seeing in terms of automation? The obvious things are drones and robots, and I think we've all kind of seen some of those things. But what are there specifically that you're excited about there? Because I'm really curious about that piece. I think I've seen a lot of people using programs for pricing, for discovering opportunities and properties, and some of that seems to be okay. Some of it seems to be a little wonky still. I'm just kind of curious. What are you seeing that's actually moving the needle?
Yeah, so I'm very interested in the software side of automation, particularly when it comes to the front end of development. So identifying sites, evaluating sites, and then actually doing the cost and underwriting analysis. So I think we're not too far away from a world where a lot of the front end, the analyst work of ground up real estate development can be automated. So think about it this way. So the piece I'm writing is actually very tactical. What specific software tools would I stitch together?
Sure.
And how far could you take it? Now, it's not perfect yet, but I think it will actually be pretty good in a couple of years of going end-to-end ground up small multifamily, let's say, real estate development, purely automated. So, what tools do you use? You use a scraper on LoopNet to identify sites, get those addresses, run them through a zoning analysis tool like a city builder or something like that. Do an initial kind of, okay, here's the massing I can build here, feed that into a test fit program that will allow me to actually get a sense of, okay, well, how many units can I get in this site? And then go to a construction automation tool or a cost automation tool like an Edify, get actual construction pricing, do the and then do the interiors like a GoSource or something like that. So can you string these tools together in a way where you basically can run a program off of an initial list of addresses and get out and automate underwriting through Archer, for instance, and get out actual pro formas of sites? I think we're getting there. We're not there yet, but thinking about how you would tie that together end to end to automate small multifamily development. And, then can you actually, contact general contractors, get bids on that site through an automated system? Where your investment committee every week kind of looks at automated reports and decides what to press go on. So we're not there yet, but I think it's an exciting topic and there's some fun stuff happening.
Yeah, that's super exciting. I look forward to reading that article. That sounds super interesting. I've given it a bit of thought, but every time I start thinking about it, I realize that there's just too many gaps. But you've clearly dug into it even more, which is awesome. So I'm really
There
excited.
are still gaps. You can't actually do this yet, but the gaps are getting narrower and narrower.
Yeah.
And there's more things that are bridging them. in a higher fidelity way. So it's getting close.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we should be wrapping up real soon. I wanted to ask you kind of what's next in 2025. What are you, other than some of these great articles you're talking about, are there any other kind of initiatives that you're interested in or excited about?
Yeah, I mean, we're really going to be doubling down on our education business. That's going to be a big part of what we're doing. We've seen a lot of really positive feedback on that.
Nice.
Both from the prop tech companies that are going through it, as well as people beginning their careers as real estate developers or just looking to brush up on some of the basics. So we're going to be leaning into the education side really heavily in 25, and I'm very excited about that.
Awesome. Are there any? What's the best way for the audience to keep up with you, keep in touch with you? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, totally. So you can find everything we're doing at thesisdriven.com, and I am Brad at thesisdriven.com. So feel free to shoot me a note or message me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks very much, Brad. Appreciate having you on.
Thanks,
Brad. Thanks for having me.
We want to hear your thoughts and feedback on today's episode and what topics you would like us to discuss in future episodes.
Follow us on Spotify to be notified when our next episode is live. To connect with John and I, follow us on LinkedIn.
Thanks for joining us today on Breaking New Ground.